season starts here, the Vancouver Boat Show.
Welcome to the virtual International Boat Show, Vancouver International Boat Show, virtual seminar series, sponsored by Freedom Marine International Yacht Sales, the premier choice for exploring the passion of yachting. Thank you for joining us. The seminar will begin in one moment. If you are having technical difficulties, you can reach me, the online moderator, via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions for our speaker can be added in the Q&A box, also at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered after the slide presentation. It is our pleasure to present Seaburban Around Alone, the Lure of the Distant and Difficult, and with Bert, terHart, and will be introduced by Don. Over to you, Don.
Thank you. My name is Don Butt. I'm a member of the Canadian Power and Sales Squadron, Gabriola Power and Sales Squadron, and I've known Bert for quite a few years. So I'm going to try and introduce Bert a bit here. Just say that he's been an active member of the Gabriola Power and Sales Squadron for many years, serving as the educational officer during that time. And that is until he decided to embark on his lifelong dream, a solo, non-stop circumnavigation using only sextant, an almanac, and some paper and pencil. No GPS or other electronic means. The sites were reduced with paper and pencil only, and that's not bad for a math and physics expert and software developer on the side. Anyway, this is the first time a North American has ever done this way. So he's somewhat acquainted with the sea's unpredictable behavior with a career as an oceanographer. He is the 2020 recipient of the highest honor an amateur sailor can receive, the Ocean Cruising Club Barton Cup. And in normal times, recipients are flown to England and presented by the patron, a member of the royal family in England. So Bert lives on Gabriel Island with his lovely wife, Nani, and they are our treasured friends. So over to you, Bert.
Thank you, Don. That's a wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. And firstly, before I really get started, I would like to thank Heather Robinson for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. It's a privilege to speak with my fellow boaters, navigators, and of course adventurers, and I'm honored and deeply grateful for the invite. And today I'd like to talk about my solo nonstop circumnavigation via the 5 Great Capes using only traditional navigational tools. So in essence then, Seaburban, the name of the boat, Seaburban, Around Alone, the Lure of the Distant and Difficult. And fundamentally, I think what we're talking about are limits, and more specifically, how to push those limits. And every goal you set out to achieve represents a limit of some description and a pushing of a personal envelope and reaching for something that's outside your comfort zone. And when you choose to reach outside the comfort zone of just about every sane person on the planet, there's always going to be questions, firstly, about how, and perhaps more importantly, about why. So in order then, let's deal with how. I'd like to tell you or discuss with you today what it takes to function when the chips are really down and when the choices you make really matter, as in really, really matter. What you can do when you're faced with annihilation, whether that's literally or figuratively. And I'm going to give you something you can totally rely on, something you can do even when you're being crushed by circumstance and situation. And secondly, I want to talk about why. And I'd like to talk about why, not so much in the practical goal-oriented why, because I think that isn't necessarily the more interesting of the two sort of macro whys. The second one I think that's more interesting is what drove me to do it. Like, why did I do it? What's in me that drove me to do something like this? So, well, as Don alluded to, in the introduction, let me give you some insight into me and some background as to why I chose to do it. The scientist in me likes rigor. I like the rigorous, logical pursuit of knowledge, and I like the idea that anyone, anywhere can contribute to the global knowledge base and to a profound understanding of our place in the natural world. And the entrepreneur in me likes process. So that would be the process of pursuing new ideas, new ways of doing things that are transformative, new ways of doing things that provide value where none existed before. And the adventurer in me likes the opportunity to connect with our shared history, our shared journeys and experiences. And we live in an incredibly special part of the world where real physical connections to that history and those journeys and those experiences are literally a stone's throw away. I mean, I've been to the Bering Sea following Cook's search for the Northwest Passage. I've been around Vancouver Island and around the Queen Charlotte Islands and into the Aleutian Panhandle and Kenai Peninsula in the wake of Vancouver, Bligh, La Perouse, and Quadra. I've been to Morro Bay and Friendly Cove in the footsteps of the Spanish. And where else indeed in the world is all that possible right on your doorstep? But I wanted my particular adventure to be solo. I mean, truly solo and alone, and not in the context of something like the Ark or the Golden Globe race, something where you don't have daily radio contact with your fellow sailors and competitors, and something that does include an overarching safety net provided by race headquarters and tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure for support and encouragement. So I didn't want any of that. I wanted solo and alone. And a friend once asked me, because he didn't figure me for the golfing type, why I like to golf, or why I like the game. And I told him I like golf because it's impossible. So adding all those things up, you have a little bit of a sort of a glimmer of an insight into why I attempted a solo nonstop circumnavigation using only pencil, paper, table, sextants, and a watch. In fact, this watch. And so I had no sponsors. I didn't look for sponsors at all. The only people that were sort of in my corner, as it were, when I started out, was my sister heading up the shore team and some family friends, notably Dr. Don Butt here and John Bullis, both members of the Power Squadron here in Girviola. And I would be absolutely and totally remiss if I didn't mention the support of the Ocean Cruising Club, especially the Ocean Cruising Club Adventure Challenge Grant. I was awarded the Adventure Challenge Grant just days before I departed, and that enabled me to communicate on social media with what I was experiencing and what I was doing with respect to the trip. And again, the Ocean Cruising Club and its members, especially Tony Gooch, Randall Reeves, and Rick Whiting, that my circumnavigation would have been something totally different had it not been for the OCC. Well, I actually learned to sail in Saskatchewan on Boundary Dam. Boundary Dam is a small reservoir that was built on Long Creek to provide cooling water for a coal-fired power plant. Boundary Dam is tiny. And Estevan is 9 miles north of the North Dakota border and about maybe 70 or 90 miles west of the Manitoba border. So it's in the heart of the prairies. And a solo circumnavigation is pretty much light years removed from any sailing anyone can possibly do on Boundary Dam, not to mention very nearly impossible. Well, this is a picture of Seaburban taken by my wife Nani when she was on Sax Point, and in the right middle background you can see Race Rocks. So this was Seaburban, October 27th, 2019, and I don't think there's one person that saw me depart of Royal Victoria Yacht Club, like one boat that I passed, going past Victoria. I don't think anybody would have imagined that I was attempting at that point to sail around the world by myself using only a sextant. So, and I have to ask always have to ask, what does a mind-bending suicidal attempt at the near impossible have to do with anything other than just flat out crazy? I mean, a solo nonstop circumnavigation of the planet is one of the most difficult and dangerous things a human can attempt in any number of perspectives. And doing it using only traditional navigational tools, so that's no electronic position finding whatsoever, is almost unheard of. And I say, it's Seaburban, it's the Five Capes. That's the name, Seaburban around alone, the Five Capes. So this image here is of my track around the world. It's my actual track around the world. The little white squiggly line. And the Five Capes, of course, are Cape Horn, Cape Agulhas, Cape Leeuwin, Southeast Cape, and South Cape. So there's Cape Horn. It's at the bottom of the Americas. There's Cape Agulhas. It's at the bottom of of Africa. Cape Leeuwin is at the bottom of West Australia. Southeast Cape is beneath Tasmania, and the final Cape, South Cape, is south of New Zealand. And what's interesting, I guess, about these from I guess on a personal note is I'm both my parents are Dutch, so I'm very connected to my Dutch sailing heritage, of course, and all of these places were visited. In some case, the first visitors or the first people near those places, I should say, the first Europeans were Dutchmen, and I'm one of the few people that have sailed in, for example, Cape Horn, and then which was I mean, it's under, I guess it's contested because it might have been an Englishman, Walter Raleigh, or Sir Walter Raleigh, but it's generally considered to have been William Schoten, who was the first Caucasian sailor to come by that place. And he named it Cape Horn because that's where he's from. I've actually sailed near Cape Horn, or obviously near Cape Horn, but also Horn, the village where William Schoten is from. So that's, my dad thought that was interesting. So maybe it is, but there's something beyond the Five Capes that has to do with something interesting about the Five Capes has to do with my Dutch heritage. But nonetheless, these Five Capes, sailing around the Five Capes, for me, translated into 265 days, 28,860 nautical miles alone. So that's 9 months of unrelenting deprivation, isolation, and starvation. And I was down to 800 calories a day at one point because I was running out of food. And you are literally one step away from oblivion day and night, continuously, no matter what the weather. Because if you step off the boat, you're done. And Seaburban's cockpit is barely 6 feet wide. So I only have to take, one step to the rail and then another step and I'm gone. And doing anything outside, certainly in the Southern Ocean, means you're crawling around on your hands and knees. And it's not so much, I mean, clearly you don't want to get thrown off the boat. So there's a reason to do that so you don't get thrown off the boat, but you can't get injured. Because if you get injured, then things are over in a very big way, very, very quickly. I did, in fact, in the Southern Indian Ocean, I was flung against the stainless steel binnacle guard, bent over backwards. And I spent 2 days strapped to my bunk, fortunately when the weather was half decent, trying to get myself back together again to be able to function at least well enough to sail the boat. So getting injured is I think it's the worst of all possible endings, because you might end, if you're over the side, you might end quickly, but if you get injured, you might end very slowly and agonizing, which doesn't sound like much fun. So you can't get injured. The other thing is, of course, that you're thousands of miles from land. Fully 2/3 of this trip is in the harshest, most extreme, most violent marine environment on the planet. And help, let alone rescue, is virtually impossible. I mean, the nearest human being is literally 200 miles that way in the International Space Station. And of course, you have to sail the boat 24/7. So which means you don't get any sleep. I never slept more than 2 hours straight in any 24-hour period, and never more than 4 hours total. So I fell, over the course of the trip, I fell asleep standing up. I fell asleep sitting down. I fell asleep eating, steering, grinding on a winch. I fell asleep on the head, which lends a whole new meaning to rude awakening. So I fell asleep sending emails. So you're exhausted. And the motion on the boat is typically so violent, certainly in the South, that I ate every meal standing up, because it's the only way to wedge yourself into place, because you need a hand for the bowl and a hand for the spoon or the fork. So for those 9 months, you're literally under the gun to perform at the highest possible level nonstop, without rest or reprieve. And the mental and physical challenges that must be overcome when doing this are mind-numbing and beyond imagining for most, I would say, sane people. So the question, I made it worse by choosing to use a sextant. I spent typically 2 hours a day navigating, just figuring out where I was. Not so much because I was going to hit land, but I'm concerned about weather. And I used traditional navigational tools, which is what you see here. I had a sextant, I had an almanac, customized worksheets and plotting sheets, and concise S-tables. They were developed concise S-tables are solutions to the navigational triangle developed by Mike Pepperday. They're similar to HO 208 or Adjutant's 211. And what you see here are customized worksheets that I developed, that I used specifically for use with the S-tables. And I developed them so that I could have everything on the chart table and have it pinned down with just one hand. Typically, anyone who's done celestial navigation uses HO 249 or 229. And 229 is 6 volumes that probably weigh 20 pounds and take up, literally 3 feet or literally 2 feet of linear book space. And I did away with all that with 9 pages that you see here, these simple 9-page laminate or spiral bound pages. So that works anywhere in the world for any celestial body. And of course, because I'm a nerd, I use slide rules. What you see on the left are the circular slide rule is a Weems and Plath vector slide rule. It allowed me to calculate true and apparent wind. It allowed me to calculate closest point of approach of storms or other vessels. And it also does speed and distance calculations. And on the right-hand side is a Keffel and Essel log duplex trigonometric slide rule that I used to solve the navigational triangle directly. And I also used it to drive longitude and time because I use something that's out of popular usage called the chronometer time site. So, and that requires a mathematical solution, which I did with the slide rule. And in the middle is a slide rule that does addition and subtraction. Typical normal slide rules can multiply and divide and do logs and natural logarithms and trigonometry, but they can't add and subtract. And the tables you see there require adding and subtracting large columns of number. You're so tired that you cannot add and subtract. So when I got exhausted and I knew I was going to make a mistake, I pulled out my arithma, this little thing that does slide rule addition and subtraction. And I got everything off eBay for a song, actually. So it's all used. But in the end, it adds up to 2 or 3 hours a day extra on top of everything else you have to do. So I said it's hard, and I said it's beyond imagining for most sane people. So I guess the question is just how hard is it? So let me give you, I think, what is a little bit of perspective. Man had been to the moon and back before someone completed a solo nonstop circumnavigation. The first person to do it was Robin Knox Johnson, later knighted for his effort. He was the first person to sail nonstop around the world by himself via the 5 Great Capes. It's the only way to do it if you're not going to stop. He completed that voyage in April 1969 after 312 days at sea, and only a few months later in July, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Both were considered virtually impossible at the time, and both are every bit as difficult today as they were decades ago. So by the numbers then, so don't take my word for it. Let's look at some numbers. So 6,000 people have climbed Everest, made it to the top. 600 people have been in space. 300 people have completed, or thereabouts, a little more, have completed a solo nonstop circumnavigation. 9 of those 300 have done it using celestial navigation alone, and that number was only 3 up until 2018. 2018 marked the end of the first anniversary of the Golden Globe race, or the reincarnation of the Golden Globe race. And 5 of those finishers, everyone has to do it with only celestial navigation, no electronic navigation. And those 5 finishers moved the needle from 3 to 8. I'm the 9th, and I'm also the only American to do it. So that's North or South American to do it. Strictly solo nonstop circumnavigation using only celestial navigation, no electronic navigational tools whatsoever, including a calculator. So if you don't like those numbers, and let's talk about fiscal numbers, let's talk about it in terms of dollars and cents. In North America alone, there are 19,900,000 millionaires, and there's 1,300,000 millionaires in Canada. There's 658 billionaires in the Americas, and 44 in Canada. And there's only 1 person who's done a solo nonstop circumnavigation using only traditional navigational tools, and I am that one. So in terms of statistics, you are more likely to win Lotto 649 4 times in a row. That's 4 times consecutively than you are to successfully complete a solo nonstop circumnavigation using only celestial navigational tools. So it is, statistically, it is a virtual impossibility. But I did it. So the question is, how come me? And I didn't realize before I left and when I was coming back that it was going to be a very big deal. I mean, to be quite frank, who really cares about a 61-year-old sailing around the world in his boat? And Seaburban is not a race boat, as you can see here. Seaburban is basically, it was built in 1987. It's basically a Reliance 44, finished to a very high standard by by Hank Hinckley and a Canadian partner in Hamilton, Ontario and like I said, 1987. The Reliance itself is designed by a Canadian. It's an older CCA design that there was some 48 built. Suburban is 42 of 48, I believe. And the design was done in the late 70s, the late 60s and early 70s. It's an old boat. And it's a bit like taking Suburban around the world in the Southern Ocean is a bit like taking an RV on the Paris to Dakar rally. You can do it, but it's not recommended. So, why would anybody care about, me going in this old boat as opposed to some flat out, super fast foiled racing boat? So it ended up being, I was shocked to realize or learn that it was a very big deal. And I've been featured in every kind of media you can imagine. And this wasn't, of course, the goal. I mean, and it speaks to how hard it is and how this sorts of thing resonates with people from all over the world. And I mean, how did I do it? I'm not a professional sailor. I didn't even qualify for full membership in the OCC before I left. I'm not one of the exalted professional rock star-esque sailing icons that are world famous in sailing circles. In France, in particular, in Le Sable d'Olonne, where all these around the world races, solo around the world rate, well, not all of them, virtually every solo around the world race or every oceanic race of real sort of world renown leaves from Le Sable d'Olonne, and solo circumnavigators are celebrities there. So I'd be hard pressed to walk down the street unmolested in the same way that a hockey player couldn't walk down the street here in Vancouver. But I mean, I'm an average, relatively inexperienced sailor. So how did I do it? And I was driven, of course, there's some satisfaction in persevering and ultimately succeeding against all the odds. And indeed, there's something in me that likes succeeding against the odds makers themselves. But that doesn't begin to come close to what's required or what's important. And I've been interviewed by dozens and dozens of reporters, and I've been featured in all kinds of media, as I've mentioned. And that media exists locally, provincially, internationally, everywhere that there's newspapers or the internet, I guess. But the questions I'm asked by reporters, which I found really interesting, were very similar, almost always the same. And to my mind, they weren't the best questions. I hate to say they were wrong, but they certainly weren't, I think, speaking to the heart of the matter. And in contrast, one of the goals of the trip was to engage school-age children, kids in grade school, K 1 to 12, and get them interested in following the trip, and then get them interested in oceanic and atmospheric sciences, because I think that's where we face significant problems as a species. And over the course of the trip, some 2,500 kids followed me around, and they were from Kenya, New Zealand, Winnipeg, New York, all over, England, all over the place. And they would email me questions and I would answer. And they invariably answered very insightful questions, what I consider to be questions that spoke directly to the heart of the matter. And almost universally, they asked, weren't you afraid, or aren't you afraid? And of course, the answer to that question is yes. I mean, if you weren't afraid, you'd be a psychopath, or at the very best, and at the worst, you'd be a sociopath. And I can assure you that fear lies at the very heart of the matter. It lies at the very heart of success. Well, you remember this slide. This was actually part of the beginning, and part of the beginning was how. So how did I manage to achieve something very nearly impossible? How did I do it when the stakes are so high, literally life or death, when fear is basically at your doorstep? And I've labeled it. I hate to talk about labels, but I've labeled it the adventurer's ethos. And I want to talk about 4 brain-dead simple things anyone can do to start down a path that leads inexorably and unequivocally to success. Like 4 simple steps that will enable anyone to achieve any goal they have the courage to strive for. And I do mean courage in every sense of the word. It's no mean feat for anyone to reach out beyond their own comfort zone. And it's certainly no mean feat to reach out beyond the comfort zone of nearly everyone on the planet. And if you do it on a small boat, or any kind of boat, my hat is off to anyone willing to untie their boat from the dock, no matter how big no matter how big the body of water, or how long or short the journey. Because as soon as you're off the dock, you're in trouble. Because getting my captain ticket, one of my instructors told me that, I got to be, you got to have your head screwed on, because you can't walk on it and you can't breathe it. So let me illustrate now what I've the four cornerstones of what I'm referring to as the adventure's ethos. So firstly, in order to succeed, you have to plan. And your plans, it doesn't matter if they're good or bad, are the foundation upon which your successes, be they large or small, are going to be built. And beyond the obvious, you have to know, expect, and plan for every possible contingency that your mind can dream up. And especially you have to plan for every possible failure. And one of my favorite authors, the author of The Little Prince, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, I always butcher that pronunciation. So you have to, for the French people who are listening, you have to excuse me. But he said that a goal without a plan is just a wish. So my planning consisted of a number of things, but specifically, I read every single account of single-handed voyages and double-handed voyages into the Southern Ocean and around the world that I could get my hands on. Then I planned for specific weather patterns that I knew existed there that didn't exist in places where I normally sail, like up in the Gulf of Alaska, Pacific Northwest. I planned for every possible pen and paper only short form celestial navigation method. So I could use HO208, I could use HO211, I could use 229, 249, I could use the methods that are in the back of the almanac, and of course I could use the concise S tables. And I had all the documentation on board, the worksheets and the tables that would enable me to perform those calculations in case one of them went south, or in case this broke or that broke, or every possible contingency. I planned for light and heavy weather sailing tactics, weather forecasting. I planned for different methodologies for weather routing, with or without whatever weather forecasting tools I had available to me. I read every book I could on weather patterns, on cloud formations, cloud identification. It's not in my intro. No one has mentioned it, but I spent a good number of years, almost a decade in the Army, and ended up as a captain in the Special Service Force, an infantry commander, or I'm sorry, a platoon commander. So, and we learned, again, every officers, you have to read certain things, and these are the ones. So Sun Tzu's The Art of War is required reading, but he said that plan for what is difficult while it is easy, and do what is great while it is small. So I planned as thoroughly as I possibly could. And one of the things that we're taught in the Army, or that I was taught, was to play the when game as opposed to the what if game. Human beings by nature tend to be very, very optimistic, and they play by default the what if game. So if you ask yourself, what if the mast comes down, or what if the mainsail splits, or what if there's a hole in the side of the boat, or what if the rudder falls off? All those events have a very, very low probability of happening. And because they have a low probability of happening, we're optimistic, we just say, well, because it's a low probability event, it'll never happen. And then we just blow it off. If you play the when game, then you short circuit that particular bit of optimistic hardwiring in your brain, and it becomes now a de facto thing. It's an actual fact. So when the mast comes down, what are you going to do? That's a completely different question than what if the mast comes down? When the mast comes down forces you to have a plan of some description, good or bad. So I constantly played the when game before and after and during the trip. And secondly, of course, you have to prepare. You must do everything in your power to prepare your vessel and equipment for the absolute worst, because what you think is the worst doesn't come close to reality. Whatever you're imagining isn't going to come close to what it's actually like. So every system, from sail handling to cooking to sleeping to clothing, must be absolutely as bomb-proof as you can make it, because you're going to rely on it absolutely and utterly. Well, with respect to preparation, I started in January 2019 in earnest. Nani and I, well, this is a picture of the boat at Strait Marine in Steveston, where we had the boat out to do the majority of the work that was required. So a critical component of success lies in having complete and utter faith in your vessel and its gear. And Nani and I, my wife, left no stone unturned in preparing Seaburban for what I thought that the voyage would entail. So that means we poured over the standing rigging, the running rigging, the furling gear, the reefing gear, all our light air sail handling systems, our heavy air sail handling systems, the DC power on the boat because I had to generate power somehow and store it. And storm management, of course, and perhaps most importantly, interior security, because there's nothing. Most people, I shouldn't say most, but a good percentage of people are injured sailing offshore, and particularly in the South, by stuff flying around in the boat. So I was rightly worried about securing the interior, and of course the exterior, because I couldn't have stuff being torn off the boat, things like life rafts or dorades or stanchions, the dodgers, the wind vane. So exterior security is critical, as is self-steering, because without self-steering, you're done for. And lastly, water, and most importantly, water integrity, because you've got to keep the water out. If I could, the whole boat could be swept clean, but as long as water remained on the outside or not in the inside, then I could at the very least, bob in some current or drift my way to help. So water integrity, I think, is the most important thing to be concerned about when you know that the boat is going to be mostly underwater as waves sweep her from stem to stern. And of course, thirdly, you have to practice. I mean, there is absolutely no excuse for not taking every opportunity to hone and perfect the fundamental skills required to handle your vessel in the foreseeable conditions. So you get practice, practice, and practice. There is just no excuse for not knowing how to handle your boat. And in the Army, again, we used to say the more you sweat on exercise and in training, the less you bleed in battle. And you never rise to the occasion. You simply fall back to your level of training. And I think Michael Jordan said it best when he said, get the fundamentals down and the level of everything you do will rise. And when I talk about the fundamentals of sailing, I'm talking about the most basic things like docking, anchoring, furling, reefing, going upwind, downwind with a mainsail pinned against the shrouds in 25 or 35 knots. I'm talking about launching things off the boat like drogues or sea anchors, or even ladders and retrieving stuff back on board like sails that have gone over the side. The list goes. I mean, it's a relatively short list. And what's always shocked me is that the people that I know, and I've taught for example, celestial navigation for people heading offshore. And one of the first questions I asked is, who here knows how to heave to? And I'm always aghast at the number of hands that stay down, not the number that go up, the number that stay down. So that is a fundamental sailing skill, how to heave to the boat, no matter what's up in terms of sails and what the conditions are like. And you do not have to go around the world or head off, between here and Hawaii to practice these things. You can do them right here. I can do them in Trincomalee. I can do them in Georgia Strait or the Salish Sea. So there's no excuse for practicing these fundamental skills. And like Jordan says, get the fundamentals down, everything you do will improve. And finally, and most importantly, you have to persist. No matter how daunting, difficult, or dangerous or dire your situation, you can always and absolutely reduce what must be done right now to one very simple, very basic thing. And if you are willing to persist, if you are willing to find that one very basic, very simple thing that you need to do right now, no matter how simple, it is entirely possible to circumnavigate the entire globe, traveling no faster than a slow walk. But you must persist. So to persist, I mean, it sounds trivial, right? But therein lies the rub, because in order to persist, you must overcome the enemy of every endeavor everywhere. And that is fear, which, as you'll remember, I said, lies at the very heart of the matter. So fear, in particular, your fear, knows no bounds and does not discriminate between success or failure. And fear is your single biggest debilitator. And it is an unthinking, unfeeling, and indiscriminate constant companion. And contrary to popular science and belief, it is not, I'll say again, it is not a motivator. So when you're paralyzed by fear, with the wind literally tearing at the sails on the rig, the boat's mostly underwater, it's swept by waves from stem to stern, hammered and pounded by waves bigger than your house. And the force of the water that's going over the boat is enough to sweep everything off the topsides. The only thing that comes to mind is that you are alive right now. And whatever you're doing, because you happen to still be surviving, seems to be good enough. And it is the equivalent of what economists call activity inertia. So the best, doesn't matter the size of the company, how good or poorly run, companies are systematically plagued by what's working now. They recognize that circumstances have changed. They might be heading into some sort of trouble in some shape or form, and they universally respond with what's working now. Only they do it in a more energetic fashion. It's a bit like running in front of an accelerating car. No matter how fast you run, you're going to eventually get run over by the car. You've got to do something drastically different, which typically involves, turning at 90 degrees and heading off in a different direction. And as a soldier, we always, when we called it shoot and scoot. So if you fire your weapon, you stay in that one, but as soon as you fire your weapon, you give away your position. And if you do not move, then you will almost certainly be shot. But if you do move, you're giving up what's working now, where you are safe, and you need to move away from that into what's obviously a more risky environment. So there's a huge element of fear that plays into what's working now. And I've said before, and you'll have to excuse the language, but it's okay to be scared, whatever, shitless, but you must never be scared witless. So these four things, and it sounds brain dead simple because it is, and it sounds trivial because it is, but I can assure you, though trivial, it's not trite. So you need to plan, prepare, practice, and persist. If you have any idea of a plan, then you know what you should be preparing for. If you're preparing for something, you know how you should be practicing. And if you know what to practice, then you know in which direction to persist. And then you can look at how you're persisting, feed that, and then examine the plan or feed that information back into your plan and decide if your plan is working or not. And then proceed around this loop. This simple feedback loop is the single most powerful metaphor I know for success, no matter how you choose to define success. And I simply chose to define it in terms of a circumnavigation. And anyone can do this. It is brain dead simple, and it is absolutely bomb-proof. And it can be done under the most intense, stressful, and terrifying conditions that you can possibly imagine. So let me give you an example of planning, preparing, practicing, and persisting that we can all relate to. So let's talk for a brief minute about Sir Alexander Mackenzie, whom I'm sure we're all familiar with. Well, after his stunning success in exploring and mapping the route from Lake Athabasca in northern Saskatchewan to the Arctic Ocean via the Slave and ultimately the Mackenzie Rivers in 1789, he realized he was ill-prepared to accurately map his routes because he knew he actually didn't really know where he was. So he lacked the tools and knowledge of how to accurately deduce latitude and longitude. So in the summer of 1971, he canoed and walked from Fort Chipewyan on the shores of Lake Athabasca in northern Saskatchewan to Montreal, Quebec, and boarded a boat and sailed back to London, arriving in the fall of 1791. Well, during the ensuing winter, he purchased the tools required to deduce latitude and longitude, which happened to be a sextant, a watch, a telescope, and almanacs. And he taught himself how to use them, including learning the mathematics and the astronomy required. And in the spring of that year, 1792, he sailed back to Montreal from London and then walked and canoed from there back to Fort Chipewyan in northern Saskatchewan, arriving there in October of that same year. And then arriving early in the fall of 1792. And then in October, departed Fort Chipewyan for the Pacific coast via the Slave and Peace Rivers. And we know he was successful because his name is etched on the rocks just west of Bella Bella, and we can all go out there and see it. So there's an example of an incredible individual, knighted for his attempts, who simply planned, prepared, practiced, and ultimately persisted. And if you know the story or read through his journals, then you'll get some idea of what persistence might mean. But let me give you some examples of what persistence, like I no way, let me be clear, in no way, shape, or form am I comparing myself to Mackenzie, but I'm trying to give you some idea of how the adventures ethos is translated in terms of planning, preparing, practicing, and persisting. So this is an example of how I persisted, how I was able to succeed. This is what I mean by persistence. This is a picture of Seaburban headed upwind in about 20 knots or something, headed south through the Southeast Trades. And the conditions are mild. It's 20 knots and the wave might only be 12 feet. but I sailed upwind for 6,000 nautical miles or more. And what I mean by upwind is I sailed at 60 degrees or higher. So Suburban's an old CCA design, and sailing, if I go dead upwind, I can go at 45 apparent. So 60 upwind apparent in the open ocean is basically hard on the wind, as hard as I can get. I did it for 6,000 nautical miles. And sailors amongst us who know that going upwind is a bit like sticking needles in your eyes while you've got your head in a dryer with someone outside banging on the thing with a hammer. It's about it ain't much fun, but you got to do it. You got to persist. Well, if persistence pays, then persistence implies that you're taking action. And this is a picture taken from the shore in Port Stanley. The winds eventually in this storm reached 65 and gusting 65 and higher. And the chop in the bay was well in excess of 2 meters. And I sought a harbor of refuge status in Port Stanley because I couldn't get north of the Falkland Islands quick enough. I couldn't get off the banks and the tide that sweeps those banks. Well, because a huge storm swept down from the northwest. So you're allowed to anchor, of course, because as long as you don't go ashore, because as people I'm sure know that under coal regs, you're still underway if you're at anchor. So this, and lots of people have anchored, including Sir Robert Knox Johnson. But so anchoring did not end my solo attempt, but it allowed me to avoid sinking the boat. So this is a picture of Suburban before it got windy. And I had no anchoring gear because I wasn't planning on stopping. And I patched together what I would use for an anchor from the roads I was planning to use to drag behind the boat in case of bad weather. So I patched together what I had. So no matter how daunting, difficult, or dangerous the situation, you got to do something. I just couldn't ignore the fact that I was going to be swept by this huge storm. And you need to act now, not later, but now. And you can always and absolutely reduce what must be done right now to that one very simple basic thing. And sometimes that one very basic thing to get you going in the right direction might be putting on your boots, because it might take, in the Southern Ocean, it takes 20 minutes to get dressed because the motion is so extreme and you've got to put on so much stuff and you've got to get outside the boat without getting tossed out of the boat. So it's no mean feat to get dressed and go outside. And that's enough to stop you from doing it. Because if you're going to think it's going to take me a half hour to get dressed and I'm pretty good right now, strapped down, then there's got to be something you can use to lever you out of your bunk to save your ass, literally. And that one very basic thing, you need to reduce what needs to be done to one very basic thing. And sometimes that means putting on your boots. And if you act now, then no matter if your choices are good or bad, you're going to look like a genius. Because if you act now and it's wrong, then you look like a genius because you figured it out early. And if you act now and it's right, then you look like a genius because you're ahead of the game. And if persistence requires action, then persistence implies that you're moving forward. So, and you must always be striving to move forward, or at least in the direction you believe is forward, which is to say that you want to improve your circumstance. And if you're paying attention at all, then circumstance is gonna sort you out. And this is a picture, again, same series of pictures with me anchored in the Falklands. And what I'm doing, I had to go to the foredeck every half hour, night and day throughout this entire storm to make sure that the road wasn't chafing through. And what you see at the very front of Suburban is right here. If I can get it done here, give me a sec. See it, Suburban. Oops, there it is. Right there's the chafe gear. And I first realized the road was chafing through, therefore I had to have some chafe gear. So I put on some chafe gear and then watched and realized the chafe gear didn't last 5 minutes. It was fire hose and it was rags and it was ropes and it didn't last 5 minutes. So I realized I'd have to go forward every 20 minutes or between 30 minutes and an hour and ease the road, which is what I ended up doing. Every 20 minutes, I had to ease the road. And if you can see here, that chafe gear that was there is now here, this is what I did. I did that. Circumstances sorted me out. Is this working? I don't know. What do I need to do better? The circumstances sorted me out. So again, if persistence requires you to move forward, then persistence implies gauging what's working, what's not. Which is to say that you've got to measure your progress. You got to remain in touch with what's going on. So you just can't do something and then retire to your bunk and think, okay, well, I've done something, it's all good. No, that's not enough. You've got to do much more than that. So and what is really important is that progress is never measured in leaps and bounds. Progress is measured in little tiny bunches, and these little tiny bits, and these little tiny bits add up to bunches, and bunches add up to bags, and bags eventually to bucketfuls, and that's what you're after. But you don't. There's no magic pill that sweeps you, from zero to hero. You get there in these little tiny bits. Well, if persistence pays, then preparation pays huge. And in this picture, the waves in this picture are well, the significant wave height is 8 meters, which is very close to what you would estimate if you just look out over the wave field and try to guess at what they are. That's one of the reasons why it's used almost universally. So 8 meter significant waves, significant waves are a statistical measure of the wave field. And statistically, if significant wave height is 8 meters, that means that 1 in 100 waves is 12 meters, and 1 in 1,000 is 15. So for anybody keeping track, or old school guys like me, I guess 15 meters translates to 49 feet, just over 49 feet. And in waves that are about 50 feet high in the open ocean have wavelengths of something like 100 meters. And given what your visible horizon is, if you stand outside for 5 minutes, what you'll see every 5 minutes is a 50-foot monster lurking somewhere in your field of view. And I can guarantee you, and I can tell you most assuredly, that when there are 50-meter waves, 50-foot waves, somewhere out on the horizon that are appearing every 5 minutes, now is not the time to figure out how to get the storm jib on deck. Now is not the time to figure out how to manage it if you do somehow get it forward. Now is not the time to drag the drogue into the cockpit, or to attach the drogue, or to figure out how to launch the thing, because as soon as the drogue goes over the side, you risk turning the cockpit into a complete shambles. And also, and most importantly, now is not the time to figure out the most basic, the most fundamental boating skills, such as how to steer the boat when things get crazy, or how to reef the boat when it's crazy, or in my case, how to navigate with a sextant when the conditions are like this. And if preparation implies looking ahead, then it is imperative that you, in fact, do look ahead. So you got to be doing whatever's necessary to get an idea of what's next, whatever next might be, whether it's the next sail change, the next wind shift, or the next sunshot, the next meal, or even the next nap. You have to constantly be thinking one step ahead, no matter what the conditions are like, one step ahead. And by looking ahead, you remain proactive and not reactive. And nothing is more important than stacking the odds in your favor. And the best way to do that is to remain proactive. Well, if preparation requires looking ahead, then preparation implies staying ahead. And staying ahead means that you all, in my case, in anyone's case on a boat, means that you must be always ahead of the boat. So big boats, Seaburban is big enough. So 45 feet is big enough. Big boats mean big problems. Everything you do runs the risk of becoming exponentially more difficult the longer you wait. And if you're by yourself, and most importantly, more importantly, I should say, everything you do runs the risk of becoming exponentially more dangerous the longer you put it off. And you simply cannot get hurt. So if you are not looking ahead and not trying to stay ahead and trying to remain proactive, then you run the risk of an injury, which puts an end to everything very, very quickly. Well, if preparation requires staying ahead, then preparation implies that you have options, and options are your lifeblood. You must always be creating options and alternatives, no matter what the conditions might be. I mean, I was unlucky. I was unfortunate enough to break the halyard, but I broke the halyard for the outer jib in really benign conditions, considering where I was. But I had a plan to stop that from turning into something worse. So, which means that the jib goes over the side, ends up underneath the boat, and ends up in the steering gear, and then destroys the monitor, the self-steering apparatus. So you couldn't let that happen. You have to have a plan for what happens if the halyard broke when it's calm, when it's not calm, when the waves are 8 meters or more. And having a plan is not good enough. But no matter. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad, but having just one ain't good enough. You need not just plan B, but C, D, E, and F as well. And even if you think your next option is plan 9 from outer space, it's still better than no plan and no options. And like I said, it's okay to be scared, you know what, less, but it is not okay to be scared witless. You got to keep your wits about you, which means plan B, C, D, E, and F, and eventually plan 9 from outer space. Well, that's how I did it. I had this very simple positive feedback loop: plan, prepare, practice, and persist. And that how, as simple as it sounds, enabled me to get around the world and get back home safely. Quite simply, I was prepared to persist. And this is an image taken by Don of me tied up at the customs dock in Victoria. So the navigation is complete. I'm tied up. I'm no longer underway. So officially and legally with respect to coal regs, I'm finished. But that's the how. And the more important question, like I mentioned at the very beginning, is the why. And the adventure's ethos, the ethos in the context that we've been talking about, means a shared characteristic or trait. So the shared characteristics or traits of adventurers or explorers. But it also means trustworthy or credible, or of good moral character. And that is really what I'm referring to when I talk about the adventurer's ethos. I set out to achieve the nearly impossible, to garner the credibility necessary, to earn the trust necessary, so that you might hear and listen to what I have to say in the next couple of minutes. And I can guarantee you that you wouldn't be listening to this if I had sailed from here to Pirates Cove. But sailing around the world gives me a little bit of credibility. I've captured the ethos, the credibility, and hopefully the trust, so that you might listen to this. I literally sailed to the ends of the earth and back, so that you might listen and take to heart this. This is the title slide, right? Remember the title slide, The Lure of the Distant and Difficult, as the subtitle. Well, that hints at what we've been talking about, but it's not the whole story. It's not just the subtitle of the talk. It is, in fact, the entire point of my presentation today. And The Lure of the Distant and Difficult is actually a contraction of a quote by John Burroughs. John Burroughs was an American-born naturalist and an essayist who lived near the turn of the 20th century. And he said, the lure of the distant and difficult is deceptive. The great opportunity is where you are. In other words, where you are refers literally to where you are in the here and now, as in right now, this immediate moment in time and space. And this moment, this exact here and now, is more beautiful. It is more special. It is more extraordinary and strange than we can possibly imagine. And Dr. Orson Swett Marden, he's another favorite American author of mine with an unbelievable story. But one of his quotes, one of my favorite quotes, is, "The golden opportunity you are seeking is in yourself. It is not in your environment. It is not in luck or chance or the help of others. It is in yourself alone." And Rumi, a 13th century Persian scholar and mystic, whose quotes you're probably familiar with. Maybe you don't know where they came from, but I'm sure you know some of them. But again, one of my favorites. "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." The adventure, the journey is with us, and it is in all of us all the time. And we live in one of the most extraordinary, beautiful countries in the world, bar none. And the opportunity for extraordinary adventure is literally and figuratively on our very doorstep. And it lives and breathes in the 5 1/2 inches between your ears. And all you need to do is take one step outside, literally just that one tiny first step. And choosing to fulfill your dreams, your adventures, no matter how big or small, is transformative. It is necessary. It is an essential ingredient in that which makes us human. It is what lies or ties us to our shared stories, mythologies, and most profound experiences. And I would say this to you. Extraordinary stands a hair's breadth from all of us all the time. It lies by definition a tiny fraction outside of ordinary. Take that first tiny step outside of ordinary, and you are by definition, purpose, and most importantly, action, extraordinary. Your adventure, your extraordinary, will be transformative in ways that you cannot begin to imagine. And let me close with a quote by Joseph Campbell, who I think is one of the most insightful, brilliant thinkers of the 20th century. I should say the 21st century. He he said, "We have not even to risk the adventure alone. For the heroes of all time have gone before us, and where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world." And I think that might be why, I think that explains in some part why folks from all over the world, from places I've never heard of, from people who could fall out of the sky and hit me, and I would not know who they were. They followed the trip. They were genuinely and sincerely interested in my well-being and seeing the trip come to a successful conclusion. And I think that was this Campbell's quote comes to me when I think of all those people when I was who were with me when I was alone in the world, in an ocean away from each and every one of them. And I think that might be why you're here today. So I'd like to close with just a couple of points. Number one, I've been talking about me. And it would be wrong for me not to acknowledge the people that helped. And I want to give a special shout out to Paul Rabowski at Ocean Rigging and Hydraulics. I mean, I put Seaburban's mast in the water twice when I was knocked down severely in big storms and gales. And although I stuck the mast in the water a couple times, Paul made sure it didn't stay there. And I want to say thanks to Matt Price and the crew at Harbors Chandler, because I had no end of crazy requests trying to get Seaburban ready. So I would go to Matt and say, I need this or that. And this or that was coming from France or New Zealand or Great Britain or the US and all over Canada. And Matt made sure I got everything I needed. And of course, the shore team. I couldn't have done it without the support of my friends and family here at home. And this is a picture of the shore team when I arrived back on Gabriola Island, August 1st of 2020. And I'm flanked by I'm flanked by the commander in chief of the power squadron. That's Peter Bolton. By my sister on my right hand side. Me, of course, Nani, my wife, Don Butt, who you heard earlier, John Bullis and his wife Sally. John helped immensely with and virtually every single day with giving me some weather updates and guidance. So I would like to say again, thank you. To Heather for making all this possible. And of course, thank you to each and every one who's taken time out of their day to sit, watch, and listen to me prattle on for an hour. So thank you.
I think we've all witnessed Bert giving us as powerful a motivational and inspirational speech as we could ever possibly hear from anywhere. And guess what? We have 3 minutes or less for questions. And here we go with the first one. What equipment failures did you experience that potentially could have terminated your voyage? And we've already heard one.
Well, I struggled with the steering gear. I was concerned from before Cape Horn and the rest of the way around the world that I was going to suffer a steering failure. So the whole steering, everything from the steering, from the binnacle down to the quadrant was making horrible noises. So every single day I had my head stuck in the locker trying to keep everything there together, because the steering failure would have ended the trip. A rudder failure would have ended that trip, although I had an emergency rudder with me. So other than that, I was incredibly lucky in that nothing failed on the boat that was catastrophic. I had typical maintenance issues when you sail for 9 months, but nothing catastrophic, which might speak to preparation. But more importantly, it speaks to just being incredibly lucky.
Thanks. That was from Martin Sheriff. Derek DeBono, how did you plan, manage, and store your water and food stores?
Well, I very seriously miscalculated how much food I needed. So my appetite was huge, probably literally three times greater than I thought. I had a very good idea of what my appetite might be based on my other trips, but my appetite was enormous. So I ran out of food. I basically take all the food. Basically, I guess my advice would be to fill every nook and cranny with food. And water, I had 120 gallons in 2 separate tanks, no water maker. And I planned on catching water, which I was able to do twice. And I came back with lots of water. So I rationed water from the moment I left the dock to less than 2 liters a day. So I was drinking about 1.5 liters of water a day. I don't drink coffee, so that makes a big difference. But when I did collect water, I collected about 40 gallons, I think, maybe a little bit more on 2 separate occasions when it was just pouring. Like water came off the back of the boom like a fire hydrant. And I had water. I had a plan for catching water, a couple different plans. But in the end, when it came that time, it would just came gushing off the sails in the boom.
Well, thank you. There's a couple of more questions. We'll probably have to send them to you for individual answering. Although one is anonymous and the other is from Keith Deller. Both complimentary and saying you're being the inspiration for us average mariners, your why especially. And now we've reached the end of our time. So Bert, we couldn't thank you too much for this marvelous presentation. And I see that we're on tap to do it again on Saturday. So tell your friends. And we've had close to 70 people here.
Please don't be shy, because there's my contact, the email and phone number. So I'll be happy to talk to anyone. That if you have the courage to email me, then I've got the courage to email you back.
Thanks again. Webinar host number 5, Maureen.
Okay. Thank you, Bert and Don, for the inspirational presentation. And thank you for joining us today. We are interested in your feedback, either on this seminar or if you have ideas on topics that you would like us to cover in the future. Simply click on the Evaluate tab located just above the seminar description and complete the form. After the show, all attendees will also receive a post-show survey. Be sure to check out all of the features at Vancouver International Boat Show Virtual. If you have a question, check out the info booth. Have a great day at the boat show. Thanks all. Bye for now.